honestly, that kind of ties into my next question as far as how has this impacted your work. But to speak towards what you said about the Equal Justice Initiative, I myself was not even aware. I mean, I knew juveniles could be sentenced as adults because I had heard the headlines before. When a child were to commit an act, typically it would be something, if they were convicted of murder, then they would receive a sentence, life in prison. And it was something that I hadn't put too much thought behind, but I saw a documentary that the Equal Justice Initiative did several years ago. I was still in Montgomery when I saw this documentary. And it was actually at the Black Film Festival that Alabama State had done at the Free Theater. And that was the first time when I actually saw what that really meant when you sentence a child to death, or not to death, but like for life imprisonment or period, just sentencing them as an adult. Like one thing that I didn't realize was that in some cases when a child is sentenced and they receive an adult sentence, they, even if they're not 18 yet, if they're 14, 15, or 16, they will still send them to the adult prisons. Yes. And that is horrific for the child because they are preyed upon and they are abused and harassed, and it is very like terrifying and torturous for them to be in that condition and to grow up in that environment. And that was something I had no idea. I assumed that if they received that sentence, then they stayed in a juvenile facility until they were 18, or at whatever age they would have to transfer into an adult prison. So that is something that definitely opened my eyes about cases where children have received adult sentences, and just looking at what that really means for the children involved. And when you go, if you have the opportunity to go to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, you will actually see some letters that have been written to Brian Stevenson and attorneys at the Equal Justice Initiative by children who are in prison, like asking them for their help to help them. And it's really heartbreaking to read those letters and to see what those children wrote. And it's one thing that I always try to take into consideration is for a child to get to a point in their life at such a young age where they are in a position where they have committed an act like that of violence, so many other factors come into play. Like no person is born violent. Things happen in their life that shapes them in that way. And a lot of those things are completely out of their control because they're children. So they don't get to choose necessarily how they grow up, who was mentoring them, who was parenting them, the environment they are in. They're just molded by that. And then, you know, they react to things based off of their environment and the way they were raised and the things they were taught. And then we want to punish them like they have had the experience of an adult when they haven't. And definitely think that is something that I always consider, but I always, I would love for other people to possibly consider as well. It's not always as black and white as they did this, so they deserve to get this. There are a lot of other factors that come into play with that as well. But one thing I would like to speak to you about is how her case has impacted your work. And I do know about the work that you have done for years to abolish the death penalty, working with the Equal Justice Initiative and various different projects. And I would love for you to speak about that and your work with trying to bring awareness to the death penalty in the United States and to get people to consider maybe that isn't the best option, especially in a state where we do have the death penalty currently. And I do feel that a good portion of our population is probably in support of the death penalty as punishment as part of our criminal justice system.
Well, I have one basic argument against the capital punishment. And it's actually an argument that the late Thurgood Marshall made. And Associate Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall said that he had 3 reasons why he could not and would not support the death penalty. And true to his word, not once when he served or while he served on the Supreme Court did he ever vote in favor of the death penalty. And those 3 reasons is that basically Thurgood Marshall or Justice Marshall said that it was arbitrary. In other words, that you couldn't determine, or not everybody that killed someone would end up being killed, or I should say, not everyone who committed homicide would be sentenced to death by the state. He also said that it was racist, and race plays a particular important role in the history of the death penalty in this country, because once upon a time, it was almost impossible for a white man convicted of rape to ever receive a death sentence, whereas a black man would almost automatically receive a death sentence. And only, or I shouldn't say only, mostly black men received death sentences for attempted rape. Now, it's really important to understand that attempted rape does not mean, or did not mean, in some states, that a person actually physically placed their hands on someone. In some states, a black man could be convicted of attempted rape just for something that Ishmael Reed refers to as reckless eyeballing. That is, you looked at someone in a leering way. Peeping Toms, someone who was caught looking in someone's window, bedroom window, as they were undressing, could be actually charged and convicted of attempted rape. And the last part of Thurgood Marshall's, or Justice Marshall's, reasoning for not supporting the death penalty is that Justice Marshall said that it was eugenic. In other words, we kill people whom the state believes are not productive members of society. And I think those are three good reasons not to support the death penalty, because I believe it's true. And when I talk to my students about this, I tell them or remind them that when Malcolm Little and Shorty were arrested in Massachusetts, the detectives who interrogated the white women who were their girlfriends tried to get both of those women to accuse Malcolm X and Shorty of raping them. Had those women made those charges, and had Malcolm X and Shorty been charged with rape, it is very likely that they would have received a death sentence. And I point this out because this was Massachusetts. This was not a deep South state. And to their credit, neither woman would accuse the two men of raping them. And so race has always played a significant factor in the execution, no pun intended, of the death penalty. And even writers in 1912 argued that had Virginia Christian been a white girl and 17 years of age, she never would have been given a death sentence. Mm-hmm. And I concur.
Yes. Yeah. And with your work with EJI, what kind of work have you done with them, and how have you been able to partner with them to kind of further their cause and the work that they're doing in the criminal justice system?
Well, for a while, I was a board member of the Alabama Prison Project, which was a prison advocacy group. And our sort of bailiwick was mitigation, or mediation, excuse me. And so we would do what you suggested earlier in this conversation. We would look for those factors in a person's background that might help explain why they committed the crime that they committed. And those were the mitigating factors that we would argue or suggest that might explain why this person did what she or he did. And so we worked hand in glove with the EJI on that work. And frankly, that's how I first met Brian Stevenson. And, you know, I did not know of EJI prior to moving to Alabama. And I met him probably within a year after we had moved here. And so it was, I was most impressed with the work that he did because 25 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of people doing this work. And, you know, and there wasn't, I mean, you were representing people who, for the most part, could not pay you. And you were, you know, in the case of Equal Justice Initiative, they were doing this work mostly in the Deep South, largely in Alabama. So it was tough, and I recognized that immediately, and had great appreciation for not only EJI, but, you know, I think credit should be given to Southern Poverty Law Center. Because even, you may not know this story, when I was in high school, I raised money for a woman named Joanne Little. Joanne Little was jailed in North Carolina, and her jailer tried to rape her. She actually killed the jailer and escaped from jail. At that time in North Carolina, a fugitive or anyone declared a fugitive by the court could be shot down by any resident of the state of North Carolina. So essentially, every resident of North Carolina became deputized to pursue and to shoot to kill someone declared as a fugitive, someone declared by the court as a fugitive. And Morris Dees, one of the founders of Southern Poverty Law Center, represented Joanne Little. And as I said, I read about Joanne Little's case in Jet magazine, and I was probably, I think, a junior or a senior in high school, and I raised money in our high school, Westside High School in Gary, Indiana, for the Joanne Little case. And so, you know, in a manner of speaking, I guess, you know, my destiny or my path was already set. Yeah, I've had an interest in this topic for a long time.
And so, do you think that kind of, I mean, the fact that you had kind of started doing this work when you were in high school, and then while you were getting your doctorate at the University of Iowa, stumbled across the Girls Reform School, that's kind of how you learned about Virginia Christian. Do you think that was kind of what made you pursue Virginia Christian as a dissertation topic and decide to kind of dedicate your studies in that area?
I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But, you know, what I think really drew my attention or captured my attention for Virginia Christian is that I just thought it was an abomination for the Commonwealth of Virginia to kill this girl. I mean, she had never run afoul of the law prior to this incident. No one thought of her as a malcontent. She was not labeled a troubled child. She was a good student. and so you know, again, it's about the circumstances. But you know, she sadly was a Black girl who was accused of murdering a white woman. And so her age did not protect her, or her youth did not protect her, and her gender did not protect her, because those two things were superseded by the race of Mrs. Ida Below.
Yeah.
And this is not, you know, sort of my 20th century sort of rationalization. There were women like Mary White Overton and the National Association of Colored Women, and women like Margaret Murray Washington, the wife of Booker T. Washington, in that same organization that made the argument that I just articulated in 1912. Mm-hmm. And so these Black women fully understood what was going on. And the NACW, the National Association of Colored Women, put up a Herculean effort to save her life. And so that organization should, you know, in fact, if you read many, or there are several histories of the National Association of Colored Women that highlight Virginia Christian's case, because it was a very important matter. I mean, the women, or I should say, the NACW held its biennial convention in Hampton, Virginia, just days before Virginia Christian was scheduled to be executed. They pleaded with the governor for a respite, which he gave her, and so that they could gather more evidence. And so she had a stay of execution because Mary White Overton and several other Black women who read like who's who among prominent African American women traveled from Hampton, Virginia, where they met, the National Association of Colored Women met, to Richmond, Virginia, where the prison was located, to visit Virginia Christian.
That's something I did not know. I did not know about that history. That is really interesting. And it really makes me think about the role that organizations like Black women's organizations, Black social organizations have had with activism and civil rights, and bringing awareness to cases that otherwise would not have been looked at twice, but because of people coming together and basically forcing, you know, the politics and the governments at hand to be like, this is something that you're going to look at. We're not going to go away. We're not going to just allow this to happen without us having something to say about it. It really made it so that she did actually, you know, got a stay of execution. So that's a very interesting history. I actually would be really interested in looking more into the role of like Black women's organizations and advocacy and activism, because I know they've had a very prominent role. There are so many organizations that are still active today, and they still have a very prominent role in the Black Lives Matter movement and with a lot of other social justice movements, in ensuring that the cases, that things that happen to Black women in custody or just Black women in general are not just swept under the rug and kind of never see the light of the press, but we're going to keep rallying around these cases so that they don't go silent, so that the names stay in the public eye.
Yeah, well, the Black Club women deserve a lot of credit for the creation of these schools, these camps, these reform schools. Mount Meigs is actually one of them.
Oh, okay.
Meigs was originally created or started by Black Club women in Alabama. Again, with the intent of saving children, keeping them out of adult jails and adult prisons for the very reasons you basically, no, it is not wise to put a child in an adult lockup for obvious reasons.